we do offer these presentations to school groups virtually right now. So if you know a classroom who is looking to bump up some virtual programming, I know we're going to be learning from home for the next little bit now. You're welcome to send me an email or pass on my email to any teachers or educators you know who would be interested in booking a free presentation very similar to this one. And I know you've acknowledged the land in Guelph, but I would like to acknowledge the land that the Toronto Zoo sits on, which is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and many bands of Chippewa, including the Chippewa of Georgina Island. Our First Nations peoples were long the stewards of our land, the caretakers of our land, and I hope maybe today you'll learn something new, and it will encourage you to continue to have this strong connection with the land and continue to be the stewards that I'm sure you all are. Here we've got a map of the Great Lakes. That star is you out in Guelph. I'm based out of Toronto, but the Great Lake that is the closest to both of us would be Lake Ontario. Then we have Lake Erie, which is the smallest of our Great Lakes. Lake Huron in the middle, which has the longest shoreline of any of our Great Lakes due to all the islands and the extra shoreline with Georgian Bay. Then Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake that's entirely in the United States of America, and it is also the Great Lake with the highest human population on its shores. Up top, we have Lake Superior, which is our largest of the Great Lakes. It has about half of all of the water of all of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes were formed back at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 to 14,000 years ago. As the glaciers started to recede back north, they dug these huge holes into the ground, and as the glacier moved north, it also melted and filled these huge holes with fresh water. It is the largest freshwater system in the world, which is pretty important, and we're so lucky to live where we do. About 25% of all Canadians get their drinking water out of the Great Lakes. So it's a pretty good reason for us to keep them safe for ourselves. But the Great Lakes are also home to about 3,500 different species. So again, another pretty good reason to keep them safe. We've also got such a diverse habitat here in the Great Lakes as well. Everything from the open water surrounded by nice sandy beaches that we might find on Lake Ontario or Lake Huron. And that open water is of course home to so many different kinds of larger living things. We also have lots of rivers, whether they're fast moving or a little bit slower, that connect different bodies of water. And some animals and living things prefer that faster moving water in the rivers. On the other hand, we also have lots of wetlands in our area. And in wetlands, the water isn't moving very much at all. It's very still. So of course, there's different kinds of living things who are a little bit lazier and would prefer living in a wetland. And up on Lake Huron over in Tobermoor, we have lots of really cool rocky areas that offer habitat and little hidey holes for many different kinds of living things as well. My sound is breaking up. It is not good. I wonder why. Let me see. I can do some troubleshooting on my good. Not good. All right, let's see. I don't really have much else running, but I will close it down. Let me open. All right, we'll give this a go. If I need to, I can tether to my phone if we're still finding that it's not too great. Just give me another caller. Try being closer to the mic. All right, it's right on top of my computer here attached to my webcam, but I will try being a little bit louder and a little closer there. And maybe I will speak a little bit slower too, so if it does get choppy, we won't lose as much. But just again, let me know. I'm happy to rearrange some other things if we're still having some trouble. So we have lots of different habitats, and again, that creates home for so many different kinds of living things. And of course, you have all of these different kinds of living things here in our Great Lakes. Everything from insects, and many insects will start their life in water. Things like dragonflies or mosquitoes, they have their eggs in the water, and those larvae hatch, and they spend the first little bit of their life in the water. And then as they grow their wings and grow into adults, they leave the water and start living in the air. Of course, we also have many different kinds of fishes here in our Great Lakes, as well as crayfishes, which are like mini lobsters. We also have reptiles like our turtles, plants, fungi. We even have mussels, and I know mussels can look a little bit boring, not that exciting, kind of look like rocks, but we're hopefully going to spark some interest today about these freshwater mussels and how great they are for our ecosystems. We've also got mammals like our beavers, birds, amphibians like our frogs and toads. So many different kinds of living things, but today we will focus on fish and mussels. Here in the Great Lakes, we have over 150 different kinds of fish. We've got everything from small little minnows like our red-side dace up to the Great Lakes' largest freshwater fish, which is the, let's see, still not great. Okay. How about now? The little notification went away on my mic. So we'll try a little bit more here. I do have another external mic that I can go grab if this still keeps up. And again, maybe I will just tether to my phone if we give me a moment here. Sounds like I am underwater. Okay, let me, step one, grab my other mic and we'll try that. Let's see. Okay, let's try this with another mic. Is this any better? Test, test. Perfect. Okay, I am so sorry about that. I haven't had that happen before. I thought it might be my internet. I did do 3 presentations today with school groups and I didn't get any complaints then. So something must have happened after hours. If we want to, I can start again from the top and do a quick recap of what I've said already. And we will try and catch up here. I'm so sorry about that. But let's go back here to our map. You, of course, are in Guelph tonight, and I'm in Toronto. And the Great Lake that is the closest to both of us is Lake Ontario. Then we have Lake Erie, which is the smallest of our Great Lakes. Lake Huron is there in the middle, and it has the longest shoreline of any of our Great Lakes. Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake that is entirely in the United States of America, and it has the most population of humans surrounding its coasts. And then up top, we have Lake Superior, which is the largest of our Great Lakes. So these here are really important to us humans because about 25% of Canadians get their drinking water out of the Great Lakes. However, the Great Lakes are also very important for living things, as 3,500 species call the Great Lakes region their home. We've got all of these different kinds of habitats here in our Great Lakes, everything from nice sandy beaches to rivers, to wetlands, to rocky areas up near Tobermory. And of course, with this many different kinds of habitat, we're able to support so many different kinds of life. And some of these examples of living things here in our Great Lakes are things like insects, fishes, crayfishes, reptiles like our turtles, plants,
fungi like our mushrooms, mussels, which are hopefully something we will be learning a little bit more about tonight. Often mussels are overlooked, they're boring, they look like rocks, but they've got some really important things that they do for us humans in terms of cleaning our water and keeping it clean. So that's really important for us humans. So hopefully we can gain a little bit more insight and inspiration from these mussels tonight. We've also got mammals like our beavers, birds, amphibians like our frogs and toads. So lots of different living things here. But of course, tonight the focus will be on fish and mussels. Here in the Great Lakes, we have over 150 different kinds of fish, everything from small minnows like our red-side dace up to the lake sturgeon, which is the Great Lakes' largest freshwater fish. It can grow to be about 2 meters long, which these days is a pretty important number to think about. And maybe next time you're out and about getting groceries or something, you can picture a lake sturgeon between you and a person you don't know, and that's a good safe distance to stay. But of these 150 different kinds of fish, about 20% of them are listed as at risk or endangered. So that's a good chunk of our fish here that we have in our Great Lakes that do really need our help. And there's many things that us humans can do to contribute to a positive, healthy ecosystem for these fish. But we'll discuss that near the end of the presentation. We've also got over 40 different kinds of freshwater mussels here in our Great Lakes, which actually makes Ontario Canada's freshwater mussel hotspot, because we have 40 of the about 50 different species of mussels that Canada has. And that's pretty important. Again, it's a fun fact that we don't think about very often, for sure. And mussels, as I mentioned, they are able to clean our water because they are filter feeders. And what they do is they take in water, they eat things like algae, bacteria like E. coli, all those gross things that we don't like to drink or swim in, and they are able to eat those and expel water that's even cleaner than it was when it started. So they do that wonderful ecosystem service. So hopefully they've gained a little bit of value for you tonight, and we'll keep learning a little bit more about these mussels later. But 65% of our freshwater mussels in Canada are listed as at risk or endangered. So that's a very large chunk. Basically 2/3 of our freshwater mussels are declining, and we really need to figure out how to better help them. And we will talk about some of their threats a little bit later. But without further ado, let's jump in and meet some of these freshwater species at risk that we have. To start, this is a lake sturgeon, and as I said, they are the largest freshwater fish that we'll find here in our Great Lakes. They can grow to be about 2 meters long, almost 300 pounds, so they are quite large, about the same size as your sofa, basically. And they are a prehistoric fish, which means that they lived at the same time as well as before dinosaurs. And we've got some good hints as to this information, and that is because their skeletons are not made of bone. Maybe you can think of something that it might be made of instead. Maybe you're thinking about something that's part of us humans as well, something in our ears and our noses, and that would be cartilage, right? So it's a little bit softer than bone, and that's what their skeleton is made of. You might know another living thing that is also made of cartilage, and that might be a shark. So their skeletons are also mostly made of cartilage, like this lake sturgeon. And both of these were actually prehistoric, or their families were prehistoric. So you might be thinking of a megalodon, which is the same family as sharks. And so the family of sharks, as well as a family of sturgeons, were here before dinosaurs, which is pretty cool that we have something like this right here in our Great Lakes. While we look at this shark and we see that mouthful of really sharp, scary teeth, you might be a little bit worried to go swimming near a lake sturgeon. And I'm here to tell you that lake sturgeon actually don't have any teeth at all. So you don't need to worry about them nibbling on your toes if you're out for a swim. Instead, they've got these whiskers, these barbels on their chin, and they actually are covered in taste buds. And so they basically are able to use that to sift through the sand and the gravel at the bottom of these lakes. And when they taste some aquatic insects that they would like to eat, they are able to slurp them right up and eat them whole. The lake sturgeon recently moved up on the list from threatened to endangered, so they do need some help here. And that is because of two main things. One is that they live a very long time. They can live to be over 100 years old. And since they live so long, everything in their life happens a little bit slower. So it takes about 30 to 35 years for them to reach sexual maturity. And that means that's 30 to 35 years to stay alive, avoid being eaten by another fish, avoid human activity in order to even lay that first round of eggs. And that's a very long time to survive in the wild. When we put it into perspective, humans, on the other hand, our bodies are already around 15 years old. We also live to be about 100, so it takes a lake sturgeon about twice as long compared to a human to be ready to start their families. Another reason that lake sturgeon are endangered is something that some fancy people like to eat, and that thing would be caviar, which of course is the fancy word for fish eggs. Luckily, this isn't an ongoing issue. About 50 years ago or so, it did become illegal to harvest and collect lake sturgeon eggs. However, there's still sometimes a black market for this kind of thing. And of course, if we're taking away the eggs, we do take away that opportunity for those babies and then later adults when they're already struggling so hard to even get to adulthood. So next up, we're going to talk about the red-side dace. Unfortunately, I don't have a life-size 2-meter model of a lake sturgeon at my house, but I do have some models of the other animals. So I will stop sharing just for now so we can check out some of these models. So now might be a good time. If you've got questions, you can throw them in the chat box. And again, you might need to put me on speaker mode so that I'm nice and big on your screen so you can actually see some of these models that I have to share tonight. But like I said, to start, we will look at the red-side dace, and you can see it's got red on its side, and dace is just another word for a minnow or a small fish. So this is a life-size model. As big as they will ever get is about the size of my finger here, and they will live to be about 2 or 3 years old. They are a carnivore, so they eat only meat, and their preferred meat are insects, especially things like mosquitoes and flies. And I'm sure as people who spend a lot of time out in nature, you can appreciate an animal who is interested in eating mosquitoes for us. And in order to catch mosquitoes, they will actually jump up out of the water and grab those mosquitoes right out of the air. And they are the only minnow in Canada who eats this way, which makes them pretty special. I see one quick question here about lake sturgeon. What would happen if they went extinct? Well, again, kind of like our red-side dace here, they would be controlling those insect populations by eating insects and not having too many of them here in our ecosystems. They are also significant for First Nations people. So culturally, that would be a big gap to fill as well if they did go extinct. This guy too, we wouldn't want them to go extinct, but they are listed as endangered. And the main threat that they are facing is human activity, especially things like habitat destruction and pollution. Their natural range is the Greater Toronto Area. And of course, they were here long before the Greater Toronto Area became the Greater Toronto Area. And about 80% of them do live right here. And the rest of the populations are split between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. And unfortunately, we are finding more than ever that people want to live in the big city. So more and more people are coming into Toronto. The city keeps growing and spreading, and we're seeing that urban sprawl. And it's leading to more pollution as well as more litter. And the red-side dace, as I mentioned, they jump up out of the water to catch those mosquitoes. And they need very clean and clear water in order to do that, because they will go right to the surface of the water and they will look up and they will find those mosquitoes they want to eat and then jump up and catch them. However, if the water has lots of contaminants or even lots of sediments in it, it's very hard for them to see, and then they will likely not be able to find their dinner, and that will lead to their decline. Of course, an easy thing that we can do is to make sure that we're not littering. I'm sure you all know the value of that. And I'm sure often you're out there picking up garbage too and getting it out of nature and really protecting the environment too. Another fish that we have here in our Great Lakes is the American eel. This again is a life-size model, so about 1 meter long or so. And American eels will only spawn in one place in the entire world, and that is just off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean in an area called the Sargasso Sea. And so all of the eels will gather there, they will spawn, fertilize the eggs, and then they will die. And that is part of their natural life cycle, just because their migration is so long. In their lifetime, they're traveling about 5,000 kilometers, which is about the same distance as us getting in a car, driving all the way up to the Yukon and back. So that's about 500 hours of driving. And that doesn't sound like a very fun adventure to me, but that is what the eel does, all swimming. So these baby eels, when they hatch from their eggs off the coast of Florida, they will swim up the coast of North America and start turning into the freshwater rivers. So they can survive in both saltwater and freshwater, which is a very interesting trait because not many fish can handle that big difference in salinity. Once they get into these freshwater rivers, they will start to eat lots of tiny insects. And then as they keep growing, they will start eating more fish. They will spend about 5 years or so of their life in these freshwater rivers. And once they're full sized here, they'll turn back around and swim down to Florida. On their way down to Florida, they've got like a one-track mind. All they want to do is get down there and spawn. And during this time, they often won't eat at all, and that will allow their digestive tract to be able to break down, and that will save all of this energy for the swimming and the breeding. And like I said, then they die. Like with most fish, the parents don't really take care of their babies. There's no parental care involved. So one thing that the baby larva eel have to protect themselves is they are almost entirely transparent. And we'll see a picture when we head back to the slides, but you can see that it's really great camouflage to avoid being eaten by some other prey and kind of make it through that first really vulnerable time of their life. The main threat that our eels are facing is barriers to their migration. So way back in the day, initially it would have been things like pulp mills or lumber mills that were built into the rivers, especially on Ottawa River. That's where the eels used to spend a lot of their time, but however, as development started, a lot of the eels no longer could get through Ottawa River. From there, it turned into many hydroelectric dams, and those are those huge barriers that are making electricity for us humans, but now the poor eels can't get through. However, one really cool thing about eels that does help them get around some of these dams is that they can breathe in water like a fish. They've got gills, but they can also breathe on land. And we know that, of course, most fish can't do that. In order to breathe on land, they will produce a bunch of mucus all over their bodies. And once they are nice and slimy, they're actually able to breathe through their skin. So this is pretty helpful because they can kind of almost like slither like a snake out of the water, move on land, get around these barriers, and then hop back in the water. If they're out on a nice rainy evening, that helps keep them nice and wet. They can stay out for about 12 hours. So that's some good news for these eels. They are luckily well adapted to sometimes get around the smaller barriers, but they do need help getting around those bigger barriers. Any questions so far about these two? Yep, Taylor, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that. Are there conservation challenges regarding Florida? Well, I guess the one thing here to note is that I am telling you about the provincial conservation status. So here in Ontario, they are listed as endangered. However, south of the border, they have different ideas about this. So Here on our side, for some of these different fish that I show you tonight, specifically right now for the American eel, it would be illegal to catch an eel. You can catch and release it, but you can't catch and take it. However, on the other side of the border, the rules are a little bit different. So if you were on the other side, you likely would be able to catch an eel and take it home. Taylor, would you like to pop in?
Yeah, so would a summer, so something like climate change, would a summer drought impact their ability to be on land, like the summer drought causing too much of land being exposed, leaving them having to get around a land barrier?
Yeah, for sure. So seeing with climate change, we're expecting more extreme weather events. So something like a very long drought and the river water levels might go down. So they might even have less space in the river. And then that could definitely impact them being able to get out and move if they're seeing lots of very dry nights. They might be lucky to maybe spend 20 minutes out of the water, and that might not be enough to get around these barriers. And are eels able to come on land in the winter with the snow? I don't know that answer. Most fish, they don't really hibernate over winter. They will become a little bit more dormant and still be awake under the ice that's on the surface. So I wonder, that's a very good question. I'm surprised I've never had that before. So it might be something we have to take up with Google a little bit later. All right. The next fish I've got here is an Atlantic salmon. Again, this is a full-sized model, about almost a meter long, this guy here. And salmon are generally the top predators in their food chain. So they will eat a lot of different fish that are smaller than them. And often in the wild, they don't have many natural predators other than really humans, especially the salmon that we would find here in our Great Lakes. Atlantic salmon, when they start their life, they are eggs, like many of our fish. And these are some fake salmon eggs here. And you can see they're about the size of a green pea. And they are often bright orange or bright red in color. From here, they hatch into an alvin, kind of like Alvin and the Chipmunks. And they're about 1 centimeter long, basically the size of your thumbnail. And when they hatch out with a yolk sac on them, which is like a big orange blob on their body. And this is very similar to the yellow yolk of a chicken egg, where it's full of nutrients. At this point in their life, they are 0 to 6 months old. They are really vulnerable. They can't go off and catch their own food, or else it's very likely that a larger fish will come and get them and eat them. This way, with their yolk sac, it's full of all of these nutrients. They can stay and hide in the gravel, avoid being eaten by other fish, and get a little bit stronger and ready for the world. Once they fully absorb that yolk sac, we call them a fry, and they're about the same size as a French fry, about 1 inch long or so. And at this point, they're speedier, they're ready to catch their own food. They'll start with small things like plankton and then move their way up to insects and small fish. After about 2 to 3 years in these freshwater rivers where they start their life, they will be about this size here, about 6 to 8 inches. And this is what we call them a smolt. And a smolt is kind of like the teenager of the salmon world. This is when they say, I'm done living at home. I'm off to see the world. I'm out of here. And they start their migration. The Atlantic salmon that we had in Lake Ontario were landlocked. So they actually didn't go all the way out to the ocean. They just used Lake Ontario as their big body of water. However, for the Atlantic Ocean that do live closer to the coast, they would go all the way out to the ocean. In Lake Ontario or the Atlantic Ocean, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So our salmon go from about this size here to full size in about 3 to 5 years. Once they're full size, they will head back to those freshwater rivers where they started their life. And that's where they will spawn and start their family and continue the life cycle. The one really cool thing about the salmon that lived right here in Lake Ontario is that their migration isn't very long. So they were able to spawn for multiple years and keep returning back to the lake and then back to the rivers to spawn. Unlike the American eel, who's going 2,500 kilometers one way. If the Atlantic salmon were just in Credit River in Mississauga, it might only be about 20 kilometers or so. So a much easier swim compared to those American eels. The salmon that we have here in the Great Lakes are actually classified as locally extinct or extirpated. And that means that they used to be here, but they're not here anymore. However, many of us have eaten Atlantic salmon in our lifetime, and we know that there's still lots and lots of Atlantic salmon in the Atlantic Ocean. Anywhere from Newfoundland to Norway, lots of them. They are doing just fine, but the ones that are here in our Great Lakes, we unfortunately don't have a population right now, or something that is really considered a population for the past 200 years or so. For millennia, our First Nations people sustainably harvested our Atlantic salmon that were in Lake Ontario. However, when our first settlers came in about 200 years ago, they saw all these wonderful salmon, got very excited, and overfished them down to basically nothing. And since then, we've had a really tough time reestablishing these populations. The Toronto Zoo works with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, as well as the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And that these partnerships here, we are working to bring back the salmon in Lake Ontario. So at the zoo, we usually have a program where we bring the Atlantic salmon eggs into the classroom and the students raise them in an aquarium for about 6 months. And then we release them out into the wild in the spring. In a good year, we're releasing usually about 3,000 Atlantic salmon just with our group here. However, through our other partners, we're looking at tens of thousands every year. Our program has been running for about 12 years. So the good news is we are starting to see these returning adults and they are starting to spawn in these rivers where we release them. So hopefully the goal is by 2025 to have a self-sustaining population of Atlantic salmon in our Great Lakes again. So we are very hopeful that we're getting close to that goal and hopefully we'll be hitting that soon. I'm going to catch up on some of these questions here. If during a drought, if the water levels drops, could the eel bury themselves in the mud? And yes, they do that. They will actually hide in the mud as some camouflage as well. And that is likely a good technique for them to hold on to that moisture too. Can eels hurt people? Anything with a mouth can bite. And I don't believe eels are out to get us. So I wouldn't stop any eels in the water from stopping me from going swimming. How do salmon adapt to salt water and then fresh water and back? And same with our eels, right? They do that very big change. And it definitely takes a very specialized body for them to handle this, because for any other fish that isn't adapted for this, it would likely kill the fish to move from that great salinity. So it's definitely lots of adaptations in their body and able to properly handle the osmosis of the salt water to the fresh water and back, or the other way around for our salmon. So it is just lots of adaptation there with their body and adapting different organs and their osmosis systems. What is the advantage of the eels going all the way there and back? So the eels are likely coming to the fresh water to find food, just like the salmon are going to the ocean or a larger body of water to find food. With the case of the eels, they need more of those insects that they aren't going to find in the ocean. So they do need those freshwater rivers to get access to the food they need at that point in their life. Do we have introduced Pacific salmon? The answer is yes. There are many groups who are interested in seeing Pacific salmon here in our Great Lakes. And from what I understand, they are not spawning in the Great Lakes, so they do not have an established population, but they are continuing to be introduced. And we see some great goals and awesome about our program. This year, we're not able to run our classroom hatchery program as usual, but we are thinking about some ways to adapt it to this new world. We will still be raising some of the salmon at the zoo. However, I might be raising some salmon at my home too, to connect students with these salmon, because often a lot of them have never seen a fish up close or at all really, other than at the grocery store or maybe aquarium. So it's really great to build those connections and really see all of this different wildlife that they often wouldn't have seen before. That's all I've got for models, so I am going to switch back to the slides. But again, if you've got questions, you can pop them in there and I will try to keep checking in on them. Let's see, is there one more question? Oh. Could the introduced Pacific salmon population affect the reintroduced Atlantic salmon? And there's definitely more research going on about that and trying to understand what sort of niches each of these salmon fill in our Great Lakes ecosystem. Since it's been so long since the Atlantic salmon have really been a large population in the Great Lakes, it's hard to know how these interactions are going to play out. But there is a chance that maybe as Atlantic salmon do become more reestablished in a larger population, then potentially we might see the Pacific salmon stocking decline a little bit and give salmon some room to grow, but it's still ongoing research for sure. All right, so again, here's our red-side dace. They are our endangered one that we have in our Greater Toronto area, as well as beyond too. And they are having a tough time because of pollution and habitat destruction. Here's our American eel right there in the center. We see that baby American eel almost entirely see-through. Such great camouflage at this point in their life when they are so vulnerable. And then here's our Atlantic salmon, which I said are extirpated, locally extinct here in our Great Lakes. And then along the right, we've got some images there. At the top, those are their eggs. Those little black dots in there are their eyes. So even at this point in the egg, they've already developed their eyes. Below that, we have the alvin. And again, we see that big orange yolk sac on there, full of nutrients, able to give them a good fighting chance out in the world on their own. And then below that, that is the fry. So we can start to see some patterning pick up there. And these guys are ready to catch their own food and go out into the world. Here's our spotted gar. I don't have a model of a spotted gar just yet, but they are about 2, maybe almost 3 feet long. We have one model being made right now, and we're really excited to get it. But they are such a neat looking fish. They've got this beautiful patterning on them, a nice long beak nose filled with some really sharp teeth in there, which helps them because they are an ambush predator, which means they sit and they wait. And when they see their prey of choice, they will jump out and grab it, as we see on the picture on the left here. They are nocturnal, so they're most active at night, which again is really great as an ambush predator. They can take advantage of those shadows, hide in the vegetation, and jump out when they're ready to catch something to eat. They are endangered mostly due to habitat destruction. So kind of like our red-side dace, they need that clean, clear water to catch their prey. And unfortunately, their habitat, they're seeing more contaminants, more litter. They're seeing a lot of the vegetation start to disappear, which again is their hiding spot so that they can jump out and catch their prey. So a lot of these things are just contributing to their decline because they aren't able to find food. And then lastly here, we've got a northern riffle shell. And this, of course, is a freshwater mussel that we have here in our Great Lakes. This guy here is only about 1 inch long, which is a little bit on the small side for our freshwater mussels. Some of them can get basically as large as your hand. So this guy's pretty petite. And mussels, they are in the same family as a snail. So they have that hard outside shell and then a squishy living thing on the inside. And as I mentioned earlier, they are filter feeders. So that what they do is they will open up their shell, they will take in the water, they will pull out things like algae and bacteria. like E. coli, and they will eat those things and then basically spit the water out cleaner than it was to start. This little guy, who's just an inch long, is able to filter 9 liters of water an hour. So if you can imagine, something the size of your hand is doing double, maybe triple, maybe even quadruple that in an hour, which is really great for kind of balancing out some of those other threats we're seeing with contaminants and pollution in the water, as well as algal blooms. Our freshwater mussels are really able to mitigate some of those problems. However, like I said, 65% of them are endangered, including this northern riffle shell here. And the reason they are endangered is because of the invasive zebra mussel. They have come in, they are out competing with our freshwater mussels for food and for habitat space, and they're having a really tough time being able to fend for themselves now with all of these zebra mussels covering just about every available surface. But we will touch on zebra mussels a little bit later too. So I know I covered a lot of threats here, and you guys have mentioned some as well, but things like habitat destruction, whether it's from agriculture and our farmers' fields growing and growing, to urban sprawl, where again, our cities are growing into this green space that used to be like reserved just for our animals and living things that are now finding it harder and harder to find good habitat space. Overfishing used to be a bigger issue back in the day, but now there are many more regulations surrounding it, and quotas and all this sort of stuff to help keep it all in line. And for the most part, that has really helped our species at risk here in the Great Lakes. I mentioned earlier hydroelectric dams like this one here. Again, still a problem, but us humans have noticed some of our mistakes here, and we've been able to find some solutions to help these fish get by. So sometimes we'll see things like a fishway, where it's almost like a water slide that runs beside or underneath the dam to let fish get back and forth. We might see things like a fish ladder, which is like steps that the fish can jump up and over. And sometimes we even see something like a salmon cannon, which is a big tube that the salmon can go into and be shot up and over the dam. So lots of solutions these days, and we're still learning more about how to best help these fish get around. We're also seeing litter and pollution, of course, in our Great Lakes, and hopefully we'll be able to manage some of these a little bit better in the future, but we'll talk about that in a minute too. And the other big threat here that we see in our Great Lakes are invasive species. And you've likely seen some of these out and about in your own time. And invasive species is just some sort of living thing. It's come from somewhere else, and now it's causing problems here. Today, I'm only focusing on some of our animals, but of course, there's also plants that are invasive species as well. To start, we have a sea lamprey, and those are those two black snake-like things clinging to our trout friend here. And they are clinging to the trout using this mouth that's about the size of a toonie, filled with really sharp teeth in there. And they will latch onto a trout and suck the trout's blood, or any sort of fish's blood, until the fish either dies or they fall off and the fish has a big open wound, which can often get infected, which might kill the fish anyways. These are not very nice at all, for sure. From their name, we can see it's a sea lamprey. It comes from the ocean. They were able to make their way into our Great Lakes with the help of our man-made canal system. They maybe could have gotten here without the canals eventually on their own, but the canals definitely did give them a boost. Luckily, though, they are no longer a serious threat here in our Great Lakes. We've got some good news stories with our sea lamprey. That is because of some really great work that our federal government has done, as well as some other conservation groups. And basically, what we have to do is we go to where we know the sea lamprey want to spawn and breed. And once they are all gathered, you scoop them up and you don't put them back. And of course, if we're just handling adults, it's much easier than waiting for those adults to spawn and have babies and have even a larger population to try and manage. So there's a good news story there. Usually the number one question I get in these presentations is it gonna get me? And the easy answer is no. They prefer cold-blooded animals. So they are not out to get us humans, as we are warm-blooded. However, I don't know, maybe you feel really strong and you have lots of time on your hands these days, and you're thinking about swimming across Lake Ontario just for fun. You'll be swimming for about 40 hours, and in that time, your body temperature will drop enough to confuse a sea lamprey. So there are stories of these long distance swimmers who have to stop and pull lamprey off of their wetsuits. So again, they're not touching our bare skin here. That's pretty nice. And we have hands, so that makes it easier for us compared to these fish as well. Also, a year ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to have a sea lamprey suck on the palm of my hand. And in my line of work, you have to say yes to this kind of opportunity. So the sea lamprey sucked on my hand, held on for about 10 seconds. It said yuck, I said yuck, and it fell off. And I've lived to tell the tale. So sea lamprey are not something that are stopping me from swimming in the Great Lakes, that's for sure. Next up, we have zebra mussels, and those are those smaller mussels that we see in the picture on the left that are on top of the larger mussel. And you can see that some of those zebra mussels have those characteristic stripes, the zebra stripes, how they got their name. Zebra mussels came over here on cargo ships from Russia back in the 1980s, and they were secret hitchhikers. When you have a cargo ship, you load up your cargo and then you fill up this interior tank in the boat called a ballast tank. You fill that with water, and when you get to your location, your destination, you offload all the cargo, and then you also dump this ballast tank. And then you head back home. The boat is much lighter. You've got a much faster trip. However, we didn't realize that these zebra mussels were hitching a ride, and they quickly moved all the way into our Great Lakes. And they have not stopped spreading since. And unfortunately, we don't have a good news story just yet with our zebra mussels. They have done a really good job at spreading right through our Great Lakes, taking over all of this habitat, as well as eating all of this food that our native species, our native freshwater mussels would like to be eating, but they don't get the chance now. So it's a pretty rough go for our freshwater native mussels. Some good news stories, though, to throw in there and not make it sound too bad. They haven't spread past Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba, so they're not farther west than there. And a few years ago, they started training sniffer dogs at the border of British Columbia and Alberta. And if anyone is trying to bring their boat in on a trailer, they stop the boat, get out the sniffer dogs, sniff for these zebra mussels, and they are very good at sniffing out zebra mussels, and they are able to then properly disinfect and clean those boats before they come into British Columbia. So the spread is kind of managed, at least from the West Coast. The other good news story I read about a month ago is that down in Michigan, they've started doing some trials with copper, and they've been adding copper to the water in certain study sites. And this copper has been able to reduce the population of zebra mussels in these study sites by about 90 to 95%. So that is some good news, very new research. Of course, more research will have to be done, but this could be a possible solution to help with these zebra mussels and really get them under control and help our freshwater mussels get a chance again. Let's see if we saw, well, I can't quite see the chat right now. I'll do one more and then I'll check the chat. Lastly, we have Asian carp, and Asian carp, there's 4 different species that fall into this category. There's black carp, like we see on the right here, silver carp, which are on the left, grass carp, and big head carp. And those 4 all came here intentionally, brought by humans. And some of them were brought specifically for ornamental or decorative ponds as an alternative to koi or goldfish. People wanted to switch things up. Unfortunately, with some big weather events, a lot of these ponds flooded, and the fish eventually found their way out of these isolated ponds into our local waterways and have done a little bit of spreading through our Great Lakes. The bad news about something like a black carp is that they are very good at disrupting habitats. They like to eat aquatic insects, and to find them, they will snoop around in the roots of water plants, and they will actually end up pulling up these different aquatic plants. And those plants are really good at keeping that water clean and clear for our animals who do need to see in the water. And without the plants, the water can become much more murky, which then causes problems for things like our red-side dace and our spotted gar, who can no longer see through the water. The good news is that Asian carp do not have any self-sustaining populations in our Great Lakes. So they are not breeding, and that is because of some really great work by our governments, as well as many different conservation groups who are going out, stopping them from getting where they want to go to breed, and then scooping them out before they can breed as well. So good news story there, not something that is too imminent of a threat these days. On the left, though, we do see them jumping out of the water. And if you ever need a funny video for a little pick-me-up on YouTube, there are many videos of the carp jumping out of the water when they're scared. So a good little funny video if you're interested. I'm going to just stop sharing because there. As soon as I stopped it, pulled it up. Do zebra mussels offer anything positive to the environment? Well, from a human point of view, they are very good at cleaning the water for us. So some cottagers who may have recently had some zebra mussels move into the lake where their cottage is, they can often be pretty impressed with how clean their water is these days. But unfortunately, the thing is, we have to remember that our native freshwater mussels would be doing the job just as well. And sometimes we've lost them, and now these zebra mussels are coming in and showing off, but our freshwater native mussels could be doing that cleaning as well. Yes, I think it is very cool that they've been able to train these dogs, and maybe once we get a way to manage them and control the zebra mussels here, we might get to see some of these different checkpoints and other things coming in here to help then manage any further distribution that might happen once we've got some control. So with the copper, it's liquid copper. So I believe it's copper sulfate, and they're just adding it to these test sites. I don't remember exactly how much or how often they were adding the copper, but it is something I believe that was out of the University of Michigan. So you will likely be able to find that article online and check it out. I think the one thing that is in my mind when I think about this article is back with our sea lamprey, when we first started trying to control them, we used a generic lampricide. So just like you might have a pesticide, something that's going to kill those pests, they pulled out this lampricide that was supposed to kill lamprey. However, we have two native species of lamprey as well, a silver brook lamprey as well as a silver lamprey and northern brook lamprey. And unfortunately, they were also taken out, and both they're now listed as at risk. So one thing with the copper is we really need to make sure that it's targeted enough to just work with those zebra mussels so that we can make sure that our native freshwater mussels don't suffer any more than they already have and really do get that chance to pop back up. Any other questions while we're here? Again, if you'd rather unmute yourself, we can do that too. We are pretty close to the end though, so we can open up some more questions too then. So what can we do to protect the Great Lakes? I've just told you about some pretty awesome species that are here, and I've told you about some of the things that are giving them a hard time. So now let's look at those individual activities that we can do that can help contribute to a more positive environment here. One thing that's pretty easy is to conserve water, right? We don't want to take more water than we need. That way there's less pressure being put on these natural freshwater systems around us. These days we're washing our hands more than ever. Of course, we want to stay safe and stay healthy, but when we're lathering and getting all that soap on, we can keep the tap off for 30 seconds, turn it back on, and that's a pretty easy way to save some water. Same with when we're brushing our teeth too. It's also the beginning of a new year. Maybe you've got an idea of some New Year's resolutions, or maybe you need some help with an idea. But one thing you can think about is reducing your shower time. A good shower length is maybe about 7 minutes. So you can have a think about how long your own shower is and maybe make some goals and some ideas about how you can bring that down and save some water when you're in the shower. We also don't want to litter. I'm sure you've seen the effects of litter on the environment close to you. And I'm sure you've also done what you can to help reduce the amount of litter in the environment too. So we want to be careful about litter entering the environment. just when we're out on the trails, but we also want to be worrying about what we put down the drain, because our sinks, our toilets, our bathtubs, they're all connected to the sewers, which are connected to our Great Lakes. So we don't want to put things like expired medicine down the drain, because often that medicine can get all the way down into our Great Lakes and impact our fish populations. We also want to be careful, especially at this time of year, about things like road salts, and really think about how much we need to put out and whether we can use a little bit less or even blend it with an alternative like sand, because there have been studies in the winter in spots in the Greater Toronto area, maybe even out in Guelph, where the freshwater rivers are as salty as the ocean. And of course, we can imagine how problematic that would be for our freshwater species. We know our 3 R's, but we've got 2 new layers now. We've got rethink, which is about taking the time to think and reflect on the different activities we do every day, the different products we use every day, and really think about whether those things are good for the environment. And if they're not, maybe we make some goals or some different choices moving forward. We can also refuse and say no to those things that are not good for the environment. Maybe next time you're out getting fast food and they offer you a straw, you just say no thank you, and it's that easy, and we can keep one less straw out of landfill, and that's one less straw that might later escape landfill too. Reduce, reuse, still important. However, all the way at the bottom now we have recycle, and unfortunately there's new studies that are showing that only about 9% of the things that we put in our blue bin are getting recycled. So that means about 90% of those things we are wishfully recycling are actually ending up in landfill. And often that is due to contamination. Things like peanut butter containers or yogurt containers, they need to be fully cleaned and emptied before they are put in the blue bin. However, the good news is that by 2022, our provincial government has said they will be rehauling our blue bin program. So hopefully we will get a brand new program that will work for us, as well as we'll get some education components, because I don't know when I started to learn about this yogurt and peanut butter stuff, but obviously it was far too late. So we do want to make those better choices and really be informed citizens too. Which is on to my next point. I'm sure many of us on the call tonight are of age to vote, so we can vote for things that we value. However, we can also vote with our dollar and be an informed consumer. Next time we're out buying seafood at the grocery store, we can check out the Seafood Watch app by Monterey Bay Aquarium or Ocean Wise by Vancouver Aquarium. And both of these are great resources to help make some better decisions about buying sustainably harvested seafood, and like small things like that will make a big difference too. There's also some very new research about how every time we wash our clothes, little threads are falling off, going down the drain, bypassing a lot of the water treatment and ending up in our local bodies of water like the Great Lakes. This is bad news because these days, a lot of our clothing is made with acrylic or polyester, and both of those are just code for plastic. And these little pieces of plastic that are finding their way into our Great Lakes are being eaten by fish and birds, which is not good. That is not healthy for them, just like it wouldn't be healthy for us either. So some things we can do to try and reduce this would be paying very big bucks to upgrade your washing machine with a very special filter, but that is not really within the means for most people. It's usually about the cost of another washing machine, and that's not something everyone's ready to pay. However, there's some other options too, don't worry. There's something called a guppy bag, that's G-U-P-P-Y bag, and it's kind of like a delicates bag or a garments bag, and you put any of your clothes that might be made with polyester or acrylic. Often a lot of our workout clothes would be made with polyester because it's quick dry, it doesn't smell too bad, which of course are things that we want when we're working out, but we can put those in our bag, zip it up, and it's really fine mesh. So if there are any threads falling off of these clothes, they get trapped in that mesh bag and you can wash it just like you would as usual. That's something you can buy online. I think Mountain Equipment Co-op used to sell them, but I haven't seen them online recently, but you can buy them directly from Guppy Bag. We can also just try and buy less as well. If we're buying less, then it's putting a lot less pressure on the fashion industry to keep pumping out these new clothes, and plastic these days is actually cheaper than cotton or other natural options, which is why they keep making things with polyester. Maybe today I've sparked some interest about freshwater mussels and you want to learn more. So you could go check out the Clam Counter app, which is a citizen science app that the Toronto Zoo worked with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, our federal government, to create. And it helps you identify freshwater mussels that you might find anywhere in Canada. And this has a questionnaire in there, so you're able to check out some photos because there's lots of different body parts in a mussel, and you can see what you're supposed to look for, what colors, what stripes, and it narrows it down based on your geographic location as well. And any sightings that you might submit to the app are given to the Toronto Zoo and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And our scientists are able to better inform conservation work so that we can protect the habitat of these freshwater mussels because we don't know too much about them just yet. There's not actually that much research out there. They've been very overlooked. So we are trying to do some research at the Toronto Zoo as well as with Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Toronto Region Conservation Authority within the Greater Toronto Area to learn more about what mussels are here and how we can protect them. And so, of course, any data or information that you would like to share too, and if you're ever out near the water, maybe next summer, you can share that through the app and we'll be so happy to see it and help guide some of this conservation work. And of course, I did mention quite a few of our partners tonight, but a lot of this wouldn't be possible without all of these wonderful partners who do such amazing work and really are so conservation and education minded and really do want to make a difference. So that's all I've got for you this evening. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight and having such great questions already. We do have some social media pages. So if you are on any of these pages and want to learn more about fish and the Great Lakes in a fun way, you can give us a follow there. And again, like I mentioned, my email was at the beginning of the presentation and Judy can pass